Welcome to Storytime with Mansoor. Tonight's story follows. A cop discovers his ex-wife murdered, and his terrified son, unraveling dark family secrets. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Cop responds to emergency call from a little boy, shocked to realize it's his own son. The call crackled over Officer Daniel Carter's radio, a child's voice trembling on the other end. "Please, help me. I think my mom's hurt." Daniel's blood ran cold when the dispatcher patched him in, and the boy whispered his address. His own address. It was a cold November night in 2023, the kind that settled deep in your bones. Officer Carter, 38, had been patrolling the quiet streets of Boise, Idaho, when the emergency call came through. The voice was unmistakable. Luke, his 6-year-old son. He hadn't seen Luke in months, not since his divorce from Megan had turned bitter, leaving her with full custody. Their split had been acrimonious, and though he loved his son more than anything, Megan had made it nearly impossible for him to visit. Daniel's cruiser screeched as he rounded the corner toward the little blue house he used to call home. His mind raced with questions. What had happened to Megan? Why had Luke called the police instead of a neighbor or relative? And why hadn't anyone told him something was wrong? As he parked outside the house, he noticed the porch light was off, the curtains drawn, and an eerie silence hung in the air. His hand instinctively hovered over his holstered gun. The boy's call had been cut off abruptly, and Daniel's gut told him this was more than a simple fall or accident. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He stepped out of the car and moved quickly but cautiously up the driveway. The house looked different now, like a shell of the warm, chaotic home it had once been. He knocked on the door, calling out, "Luke? Megan? It's me, Dan." No answer. The door wasn't locked. Pushing it open, Daniel stepped inside and immediately noticed the overturned chair in the living room, a shattered picture frame near the wall. The photo inside was one of the few they had taken as a family, back when things were still good. His heartbeat quickened. "Luke? Buddy, are you here?" Faint footsteps came from upstairs, and Daniel's hand went back to his weapon. "Luke, it's Dad. Where are you?" He climbed the staircase slowly, his boots creaking on the wooden steps. The hallway light flickered faintly, casting unsettling shadows. At the top of the stairs, he froze. Luke was standing at the end of the hall, clutching his favorite stuffed bear, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. "Dad," Luke whispered, his voice quivering. "There's a bad man in the house." Daniel's blood turned to ice. "Where's your mom?" Luke didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the master bedroom. Daniel motioned for Luke to stay put. With his gun drawn, he crept toward the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. The metallic scent of blood hit him before he even stepped inside. What he saw next would haunt him forever. Make the reader yearn to know more. What's in the bedroom? Is Megan alive? Who is the bad man Luke mentioned? What secrets does this house hold? Let the story continue to unravel. Daniel pushed the door open with his foot, his hands steady on his weapon, even though every nerve in his body screamed to run, to grab Luke and leave. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of a nightlight from the corner. His breath caught when he saw Megan slumped against the bed, her lifeless body illuminated by the dim light. Blood streaked the floor beneath her, trailing toward the window where the curtain flapped in the cold November wind. "No. No, no, no." His voice cracked, the word tumbling out in a whisper as he rushed forward, his hands shaking as he checked her pulse. Nothing. Her body was cold, her face pale, and for the first time in his career, Daniel felt like a helpless, terrified man instead of a cop. But there was no time to grieve. He heard it, the creak of a floorboard behind him. "Luke!" he yelled, spinning around. The hallway was empty. His heart pounded as he rushed out of the bedroom, scanning every corner. Luke was gone. "Luke!" Daniel called again, his voice louder this time, frantic. The little boy's stuffed bear lay abandoned on the floor where he'd been standing just moments ago. He stormed down the stairs, every dark corner of the house a potential hiding place, every shadow suddenly menacing. And then he heard it. Soft, muffled crying. It was coming from the basement. Daniel's legs felt like lead as he made his way to the basement door. He hadn't been down there in years. Megan hated it because of how damp and unfinished it was, but she'd refused to let him remodel. Now the door hung slightly ajar, and the crying grew louder with each step he descended. "Luke, it's okay. I'm here, buddy," Daniel called softly, trying to keep his voice calm even as his pulse roared in his ears. At the bottom of the stairs, the dim light bulb cast eerie shadows across the cluttered room. His eyes darted from one pile of old boxes to the next, searching for any movement. And then he saw him. Luke was huddled in the far corner, his arms wrapped around his knees, his little body trembling. Daniel holstered his weapon and knelt down, holding out his hands. "Luke, it's me. You're safe now. Come here." Luke's tear-streaked face tilted up to look at him, but instead of running into his arms, the boy just shook his head. "He's still here, Dad," Luke whispered, his voice barely audible. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Who's here?" Before Luke could answer, there was a sound from behind him, the soft scrape of metal against concrete. Daniel turned just in time to see a figure emerge from the shadows. The man was tall, wearing a dark hoodie that obscured most of his face. In his hand was a long knife, glinting faintly in the weak light. Daniel moved instinctively, pulling his gun as he stood between the man and his son. "Put the knife down," Daniel barked, his voice sharp and commanding, even as his heart raced. The man didn't say a word, didn't flinch, just took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Dad, don't let him take me." Luke's voice broke, his sobs growing louder, more panicked. Daniel didn't dare take his eyes off the intruder. "Luke, stay behind me. Don't move." The man's face shifted slightly, and in that fleeting moment, Daniel thought he saw recognition in his eyes. Whoever this was. He wasn't a stranger. And then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit him. The eyes, the way the man tilted his head. It was Brandon. Megan's younger brother. Luke's uncle. "Brandon? Is that you?" Daniel asked, his voice laced with disbelief. The man stopped, lowering the knife slightly but not dropping it. His face was pale, his eyes wild, and there was something deeply broken about his expression. "She lied to me," Brandon said, his voice hoarse and trembling. "She lied to everyone." Daniel's grip on his gun tightened. "What are you talking about? What did Megan lie about?" Brandon's chest heaved as he struggled to speak. She ruined everything. She turned everyone against me. I had nothing left." His voice cracked, and for a moment, Daniel saw the shattered man beneath the violence. "Brandon, listen to me," Daniel said, his tone softer now. "Luke is scared. He doesn't deserve this. Whatever happened between you and Megan, you don't have to drag him into it. Put the knife down and we can talk." Brandon's eyes flicked to Luke, who was still cowering behind his father, and something seemed to shift in his expression. The knife wavered in his hand, and for a moment, Daniel thought he might surrender. But then, Brandon's face twisted with anguish. "It's too late," he whispered, taking another step forward. Daniel didn't hesitate. A single shot rang out, deafening in the small space. Brandon crumpled to the ground, the knife clattering beside him. For a moment, everything was still. The only sound was Luke's quiet sobbing. Daniel turned, dropping to his knees and pulling his son into his arms. Luke clung to him, his small hands fisting in his shirt as he cried into his chest. "It's okay," Daniel murmured, his voice breaking as he held him close. "I've got you, buddy. I've got you." But even as he comforted his son, Daniel couldn't shake the questions swirling in his mind. What had Brandon meant about Megan lying? What had driven him to do this? And why had Megan kept him in the dark about everything? As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, Daniel knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Daniel held Luke tightly as the sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of backup. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to feel the warmth of his son in his arms, and the bittersweet relief that they were both alive. But the questions gnawed at him, sharp and relentless. The home that had once been his refuge was now a crime scene, and the family he'd once loved was shattered in ways he didn't yet understand. The first officer through the door was Maria Lopez, his longtime partner. She froze at the sight of Daniel on the basement floor, Luke clinging to him, and Brandon's body sprawled nearby. "Dan, are you okay?" Maria asked, her voice a mixture of urgency and disbelief. Daniel nodded, though his hands were still trembling. "Megan's upstairs. She didn't make it." Maria's expression darkened. She crouched beside him, gently touching Luke's back. "Hey, kiddo. You're safe now. We're going to take care of you." Luke didn't respond, just buried his face deeper into Daniel's chest. The paramedics arrived soon after, their footsteps echoing through the house as they ascended to the master bedroom. Daniel couldn't bring himself to move from the basement floor, even as the crime scene investigators began their work. He felt paralyzed, trapped between grief and guilt. Maria crouched beside him again. "Dan, we'll handle this, but you need to tell me what happened." Daniel swallowed hard. "Brandon, he was here. He killed Megan." His voice cracked, the words like broken glass in his throat. "He tried to take Luke. I didn't have a choice." Maria's gaze flicked to Brandon's body, then back to Daniel. She didn't press him further, not yet. "Let's get Luke out of here," she said softly. Daniel carried his son up the stairs and out into the cold night air. The flashing red and blue lights painted the front yard in an eerie glow. Luke was shivering now, though it wasn't from the cold. "I don't want to go," Luke murmured as a paramedic tried to coax him into the ambulance for a checkup. Daniel knelt down, holding Luke's small hands in his own. "Buddy, I'm not going anywhere, I promise. They just want to make sure you're okay." Luke shook his head furiously, his eyes wide and filled with tears. "I want to stay with you, Dad." Daniel felt his heart splinter. "You will. I'm not letting anyone take you away, okay?" The paramedic backed off, giving them space. Daniel wrapped his arms around Luke again, feeling the weight of his son's trust settle heavily on his shoulders. By the time the ambulance pulled away with Megan's body, the sun was beginning to rise. The neighborhood, once so quiet and unassuming, was now a maze of crime scene tape and police cars. Daniel sat on the curb, Luke resting against him, exhausted but refusing to sleep. Maria approached, her face somber. "Dan, we found something in the house, in Megan's bedroom." He looked up at her, his body taut with apprehension. "What?" She hesitated, glancing at Luke before continuing. "There were letters, dozens of them, hidden in a drawer. They're from Brandon. The last one was dated 2 days ago. He was threatening her, accusing her of keeping secrets." Daniel frowned. "What kind of secrets?" Maria lowered her voice. "He believed Luke wasn't her son, that Megan had taken him from someone else. We don't know what that means yet, but we'll dig into it." Daniel felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath him. It didn't make sense. Luke was his son. He had no doubt about that. But what could Megan have been hiding? And why would Brandon believe something so outrageous? Luke stirred in his arms, his small voice breaking the heavy silence. "Dad, is Uncle Brandon gone?" Daniel looked down at him, his throat tightening. "Yeah, buddy, he's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." Luke nodded, but his expression remained troubled. He kept saying I wasn't supposed to be here, that I belonged to someone else. Daniel froze. What do you mean, Luke? I don't know, Luke said, his voice barely a whisper. He just kept saying it. Daniel's mind raced, trying to make sense of what his son was telling him. None of it fit. Megan had been a lot of things, stubborn, secretive, even vindictive during their divorce, but she wasn't capable of something as unthinkable as… He couldn't even finish the thought. Maria placed a hand on his shoulder. Dan, I think you and Luke should come down to the station. There's a lot we need to sort out and… well, you might want to hear what the neighbors said. What did they say? Daniel asked warily. Maria hesitated again, her face grim. They said Megan had been acting strange for months, that she'd been arguing with someone who kept showing up at the house late at night. And… She paused, her voice dropping lower. One of them said they saw her leave the house 2 weeks ago, with a baby. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. What? That's not possible. Luke is her only child. Maria looked at him, her expression unreadable. Maybe. Or maybe there's more to this than we realized. Daniel felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He looked down at Luke, who was now dozing in his arms, his face peaceful despite everything he'd been through. Whatever Megan had been hiding, Daniel knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't stop until he uncovered the truth. But as he sat there, holding his son and staring at the house that had once been their home, he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers would come at a price, one that might tear apart everything he thought he knew about his family. The sun rose higher, casting its light over a scene of devastation, and for the first time in his life, Daniel didn't know if he wanted to face the day.